All right, let's begin today's discussion over in New York City, where a former police sergeant has just been sentenced to 18 months in prison after he was found guilty in federal court of acting as an agent of China while here on American soil. Now, the man in question is former Sergeant Michael McMahon, who previously took an oath to serve with the NYPD. However, after leaving the police force, he went into the private sector, specifically as a PI, a private investigator. And it was in that capacity, as a PI, that he became tangled up in a Chinese Communist Party operation called Operation Fox Hunt. Now, in case you've never heard of it before, which many people haven't, Operation Fox Hunt is a secretive campaign that was started by the Chinese Communist Party back in the year 2014. Now, ostensibly, at least according to the Chinese authorities, they claim that Operation Fox Hunt is an anti-corruption campaign to hunt down corrupt officials who have fled abroad. The official explanation is that you might have Chinese citizens who are accused of crimes like corruption. They flee abroad to another country in order to escape prosecution, and Operation Fox Hunt is in place to try and get them back to mainland China to face justice. That all sounds well and good, until you remember that you're dealing with a Chinese Communist Party dictatorship. And so, digging just a little bit beneath the surface, Operation Fox Hunt has two main problems. The first one is that aside from actual criminals, this operation targets dissidents. The CCP doesn't just go after people who are guilty of crimes back home, they also target political opponents, whistleblowers, and people who have simply fallen out of favor with the party. In fact, along that line, when the former Assistant Attorney General for National Security was speaking at the podium about Operation Fox Hunt, he specifically pointed out that in many cases, the so-called fugitives that they were targeting were actually just opponents of Xi Jinping, such as his political rivals, dissidents, as well as critics of the party. Here is a small clip from that press briefing.
Since 2014, at the direction of Chinese General Secretary Xi Jinping, China has been engaged in a global operation known as Fox Hunt. China describes Fox Hunt as an international anti-corruption campaign in which it seeks to locate legitimate fugitives around the world to bring them back for trial in China. But this is certainly not the whole story, and oftentimes it simply isn't true. Some of these individuals may well be wanted on traditional criminal charges, and some of them may even be guilty. But in many instances, the hunted are opponents of Communist Party Chairman Xi, political rivals, dissidents, critics.
Now, besides just the targeting of political dissidents, the second problem with Operation Fox Hunt is the tactics that they use. The CCP's agents obviously can't just abduct people here in the US and put them on a plane going back to China, and so they use a pressure campaign to get these so-called fugitives to return to China voluntarily. This involves threatening their family members back home who still live in China. It involves stalking and harassing them. It sometimes even involves sending undercover agents to these people's homes to intimidate them. In one case, the CCP actually flew in several agents, as well as a man's father, to the United States in order to intimidate him to come back home. They basically used the man's father as a bargaining chip. If you don't want anything happen to your dear old dad, you better come back to China right now. And the dad, who was in the US, he couldn't just defect and claim himself to be a refugee because his other daughter was still in China in danger. And so these are the kinds of tactics that the CCP uses. And it's also worth mentioning that Operation Fox Hunt is actually relatively successful. In fact, last year you had a human rights NGO called Safeguard Defenders. They put out a report which found the following, quote, "The report looks at the first decade of Operation Fox Hunt and Operation Skynet, two worldwide operations to apprehend overseas Chinese accused of financial crimes. The methods used include extradition, repatriation, and sometimes kidnapping. The data is sourced from official accounts by the CCP's Central Commission for Discipline Inspection. In total, the CCP claims it has successfully returned more than 12,000 people using these methods since 2014. Also, it's worth mentioning that besides just the 12,000 people who were dragged back to China, the report also mentions that 230,000 additional people just gave in to persuasion tactics. Quote, "Added to these figures are around 230,000 people who have succumbed to persuasion to return, a method which, according to Safeguard Defenders, includes extensive interrogation and repeated visits of and to family members in China, collective punishment of relatives in China, or direct threats, surveillance, and harassment of the target abroad by undeclared PRC agents or their proxies." And just for your reference, PRC stands for the People's Republic of China. And the countries in which this is happening runs the full gamut. You have the Philippines, Cambodia, Myanmar, Vietnam, Laos. You have Thailand, Malaysia, South Korea, India, Taiwan, Japan, New Zealand, Australia, and of course, the United States, which brings us perfectly back to the case of former NYPD Sergeant, Mr. Michael McMahon. Sergeant McMahon, alongside two other men, they were arrested for stalking a former Chinese official, as well as that official's family in New Jersey. And to give you a taste of the kind of intimidation tactics that they were using, one of the other co-defendants in this case, this guy right here, Mr. Jung Song-ying, he went to the victim's house in New Jersey and he taped a note to his door. You can see the note on your screen. And when translated, here's what the note said. If you are willing to go back to China and spend 10 years in prison, your wife and children will be all right, and that will be the end of this matter. And so this note, it really does give you a bit of a taste of the type of intimidation tactics that literally led hundreds of thousands of people to just say, okay, whatever, I'll go back to communist China just to keep my family out of harm's way. Now, in regards to Sergeant Michael McMahon specifically, here's what the Justice Department released in a statement regarding what he was up to. And for your reference, just as in the earlier statement, when they write PRC, that stands for the People's Republic of China. Here's what the Justice Department wrote, quote, as proven at trial, between approximately 2016 and 2019, McMahon and his co-conspirators participated in an international campaign to threaten, harass, surveil, and intimidate John Doe No. 1 and his family in order to force him and his wife, Jane Doe No. 1, to return to the PRC to face purported corruption charges. McMahon, a retired NYPD sergeant working as a private investigator, was hired to locate John Doe No. 1. McMahon obtained sensitive information about John Doe No. 1, which he then reported back to his Chinese handler and others, including a PRC police officer. McMahon also conducted surveillance outside the New Jersey home of John Doe No. 1's relative and provided his Chinese handler and PRC officials with detailed reports of what he observed. The operation was supervised and directed by several PRC officials, including a PRC police officer and a PRC prosecutor. So just to pause here, I think it really is worth mentioning that this in and of itself is illegal. Even if you believe that the person you're surveilling is a criminal that needs to be repatriated in order to face justice, you cannot just work for a foreign government like that. For your reference, according to federal law, cross-national crime control requires official coordination between the foreign government and the U.S. government. And anyone acting on behalf of a foreign government on American soil must first register as a foreign agent with the U.S. Attorney General. If they don't register as a foreign agent, but still continue to conduct themselves as a foreign agent here in America, they will be violating FARA, which stands for the Foreign Agents Registration Act. It's the relevant law on this particular issue. Regardless, the Department of Justice continues in their statement, quote, as proven at trial, McMahon knew the operation was intended not only to locate John Doe No. 1, but to coerce him to return to the PRC by exerting pressure on his family members. In April 2017, PRC officials threatened to jail John Doe No. 1's sister, who lived in the PRC, in order to coerce John Doe No. 1's then 82-year-old father to travel from the PRC to their relative's home in New Jersey. John Doe No. 1's father, who had recently suffered a brain hemorrhage, was so frail that a doctor accompanied him for the trip. McMahon followed John Doe No. 1's father from the relative's New Jersey home, and by doing so, was able to learn John Doe No. 1's address. McMahon immediately provided this information to a PRC operative. Now that's obviously rough. Having a bunch of Chinese officials show up at your New Jersey home with your 82-year-old frail father, that cannot be easy. But on top of that, it looks like Sergeant McMahon took some other creative measures to intimidate this particular victim. Quote, McMahon took other investigative steps designed to harass the victims, such as researching their daughter's university residence and college major. And along that line, the prosecutor said that daughter's Facebook friends, they started to get random messages from other people attacking her father. So you can just imagine the type of psychological toll that this whole thing is taking on the family. Furthermore, in regards to the payment made for his service, the Department of Justice wrote the following, quote, McMahon was paid more than $19,000 in total for his role in the illegal repatriation scheme. In an apparent attempt to conceal the source of payments from his PRC clients, McMahon deposited those payments into his son's bank account, the only time he had done so with client payments. And as such, Sergeant Michael McMahon was given an 18-month-long prison sentence for acting as an illegal agent of the government of the People's Republic of China right here on American soil. If we reference the other two co-conspirators who were indicted alongside him, were given similar sentences. Zheng Songying, the young man who taped the note to that man's door, he was given 16 months in prison, while Zhu Yong, a 68-year-old Chinese retiree, was also given 16 months in prison. Both of them began serving their time late last month. And then, to sort of wrap everything up, in announcing the sentencing, the U.S. attorney who was assigned to this case said the following, quote, McMahon, a former law enforcement officer who swore an oath to protect the public, went rogue and dishonorably engaged in a scheme at the direction of the People's Republic of China, terrorized victims living in the New York metropolitan area, and shattered their sense of safety and security. Thanks to the efforts of law enforcement, the defendants' plan to coerce the victims to return to China failed, and the defendants have instead been brought to justice for their role in China's insidious Operation Fox Hunt. Now, while the American portion of the scheme has now been wrapped up with these three co-conspirators sitting behind bars, it's actually unclear what happened to this New Jersey man's family back in China. His father and his sister and his other family members, who knows? Now, fortunately, this case did get enough public attention that maybe his family members back home will be safe just because there's a large enough spotlight on them. But it does kind of just remind us that this is one case of many. There's 200,000 people who repatriated themselves back to China because the intimidation tactics were so severe. And so you can imagine that even if this man's family is safe just because so much news coverage has been devoted to him, many other people are not as lucky. Regardless, if you would like to dig deeper into this particular story or Operation Fox Hunt as a whole, I'll throw several great resources down into the description box below if you want to dig deeper into the weeds. And all I ask in return is that as you're making your way down there to the description box, take a super short detour to smash that like button so this video can reach ever more people via the YouTube algorithm, and smash that subscribe button as well if you haven't already. That way you can be informed of any new videos as soon as we publish them on this platform. And then until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Stay informed, and most importantly, stay free.